There's only one person that I want to see. It's our next guest here on the Craftsmen Online podcast. He is worth getting up early for, whether it's coffee or a virtual interview like this. Brother Angel Millar, welcome back.
Thanks very much. Good speaking to you again.
And as I told you leading up to this, I'm like, I'm going to hit record because I don't want to get too much of this out there. But this is one conversation, one topic that the only person I really wanted to talk about this with is you. Because as a Blue Lodge Mason, I have heard a lot about Memphis-Misraim.
Yeah.
As you can imagine, all kinds of just crazy out there things, and some stuff where I'm like, well, okay, this sounds like it could be somewhat true.
Yeah.
You've got a new edition of the Fraternal Review that's out that's dedicated to this.
Yes.
Before we really jump into what's between the pages, as the editor-in-chief of the Fraternal Review, what motivated you to get into this, and what should guys like me know before we start this conversation?
Yes. So Memphis-Misraim, or sometimes called Memphis and Misraim, is a rite or rites of fringe masonry that is highly controversial, largely because it has so many degrees. Most of the rites have around 96 degrees, some a couple more, some were reduced to 33 degrees. But it's always been a bit of a competitor to the Scottish Rite as such, as you can imagine. But it's also often considered to be much more esoteric and occult and kind of overlapping onto ritual magic to a certain degree. And in some of its incarnations, it does resemble the Hermetic Order of the Golden Dawn to quite a large degree. So that is probably why it's controversial, or partly why it's controversial. It was originally two different rites, the Rites of Misraim and then the Rite of Memphis, and then they fused together to become the Rite of Memphis-Misraim.
Okay, we're going to unpack a little bit more on that because you did a great job in the intro for this edition talking about this and kind of giving that high-level overview for those that don't get it. My first question here is, when you talk about it being kind of a competitor to the Scottish Rite, which then also would mean the York Rite, so a lot of our concordant bodies. So the basic story of the first 3 degrees of Freemasonry really revolve around the allegory of building your symbolic temple, King Solomon. There's a lot of religion that's stewed into that.
Yes.
Does this rite follow that, or is there other undertones? And you mentioned magic, so it's less religion and more mystic?
Well, many of the degrees are based on the sort of same Hebrew, Jewish, Old Testament mythology that you would find in Freemasonry, in Crafts Freemasonry, and many of the degrees are more or less the same as the Scottish Rite as well. But yes, it does have some different elements. We actually have one article explaining the esoteric symbolism, and in a sense, even what one might call the magic of the 3rd degree of Memphis-Misraim. And there the candidate is identified with the god Osiris, the ancient Egyptian god Osiris, and is not merely raised or even resurrected. The point is that you kind of become, in a sense, a living God, or something is incarnated in your soul. You are resurrected and become this, essentially a divine being. So it's a lot more mystical in that sense.
Okay. And then I want to get back to the point you made where they were 2 separate bodies. You had Memphis and then you had Misraim, and then they came together. What was the reason for that?
Well, originally it was Misraim and then later Memphis. So to give a little bit of the prehistory and history of Memphis-Misraim, during the 18th century, of course, you get this explosion of Masonic rites and degrees. I think there were about 1,000 degrees by the end of the 18th century, and multiple rites: the strict observance, the Asiatic Brethren. You have the forerunners of the Scottish Rite, of course, and then sort of fringe, almost fringe Masonic rites or orders such as the Golden Rosy Cross or Golden Rosicrucians, which was only open to Freemasons. So you have all of these rites, and then by the end of the 18th century, you have also, of course, the Egyptian Rite of Freemasonry, which isn't really based on anything Egyptian. But Egypt was very much in vogue at that time, so it acquired that name, and no one had created an Egyptian rite, at least that was known at all. So that was a good new spin on the fraternity. Others were teaching alchemy or saying that they descended from the Knights Templar and so on. And the Egyptian rite itself, founded by Count Cagliostro, was, as I say, not influenced by ancient Egypt, but influenced by contemporary Rosicrucianism and alchemy, Hermeticism, this kind of thing. And it's very evident in their rituals. But this leads on to the creation of other rites. And then around 1805, you get the Rite of Misraim, which originally had around 77 degrees. And then at that point, I think had 95 degrees. And then one of the members of the Rite of Misraim, Marconis de Negre, he seemed to be in a little bit of a rogue, we might say, kept having falling outs with the leadership of the Rite of Misraim. And then later he founded his own Rite of Memphis, which was essentially the same rite. And then they merged back together, or very similar rite, one should say.
Okay. So you hit on something I love how the issue, and we're talking with Angel Millar, the editor-in-chief of the Fraternal Review, a great publication from the Southern California Lodge of Research. The new issue is out now, and the link to get it is also in the notes for this episode. But you open up with saying, quote, the Rite of Memphis-Misraim has fascinated, intrigued, and even enraged regular Freemasons. And you were saying how you had to be a Master Mason before you could enter into this. So why did it become so contentious within the brothers within our craft?
Well, so one of the reasons is they will confer the 3 degrees if you join a Memphis-Misraim rite today. So in that sense, it is an irregular rite. But I think the real reason has nothing to do with that. All of these rites, of course, the Scottish rite has its own 3 degrees, of course. So, that needn't be conferred. But I think the real problem is that it has so many degrees that it dwarfs the Scottish rite. Albert Pike referred to the esoteric teachings and rituals of Memphis-Misraim as "quote unquote" cheap wares. So he seems to have been a little bit had his nose put out of joint, we might say. And I think that's because if you're the Grand Commander in a 33rd degree and someone else is a 50th degree or 60th degree or 70th or 80th or 97th degree, maybe being the 33rd degree and Grand Commander is not as privileged and as special as one might have thought. Right. So I think that's the real reason, to be perfectly honest.
It's kind of, that is humorous to me because they're really just the number size. We get to that where for those outside of the craft, and you're hearing us talk about degrees, so there's the first 3 degrees, and we've talked a lot about this on the podcast, and they're similar to, I would say, like a college to like a high school to college, like your undergrad experience. And then when you get into these concordant bodies for further light or more light or additional light or all the light, whatever the term you want to use is in Freemasonry, I don't want to diminish any of the value or the work and the research that brothers have put into this, but degree is a good word to use. But for the uninitiated, I also say it's kind of like chapters in a book where the story keeps going and there's more information and there's just more. So yeah, the idea of a system that has 100 degrees in it, I could see outsiders being like, well, geez, is there anybody who's ever gone through all of this or experienced? Because even in the Scottish Rite, where they do have the 32 to 33 degree system, you'll run across people who are like, oh, well, they don't do this degree anymore. So nobody really sees it.
Yes, that's right. And I think it's pretty common for the Scottish Rite, which has 33 3 degrees to do only 5 degrees.
Mhm.
And that is the case. I mean, I'm not a member of Memphis-Misraim, and there are many different rites of Memphis-Misraim today, and many are have an agreement where they recognize each other, and I suppose some don't as well. But so I couldn't tell you what goes on exactly, but I know that in some of them they do not confer, or probably most of them they don't confer all 96 or 97 degrees. No, or they confer it in word only and tell you that you're now an 18th degree or whatever it may be.
Yeah. Well, that was another point I wanted to touch, because regardless where it falls within the relevancy, the ranking, the connection that it has with Freemasonry as we know it today, right? The number of cultures that this rite touched over the course of time is pretty fascinating.
Yes, that's right. And actually, although I said that Marconis's Rite of Memphis was very similar to Misraim, that is true. But he did introduce other elements from Northern Europe and India, and more from Egypt as well. So originally it was more sort of, a Jewish Old Testament, but then all of these other elements were introduced. And I think we talked on a previous episode about the rite of the Night of Scandinavia degree, which is in the Rite of Memphis, or at least in the Rite of some Memphis-Misraim today, and in that you are going through Northern European mythology from the Poetic Edda and maybe the Prose Edda, and learning about the god Odin, and you receive a cipher which is the Younger Futhark runes used in Scandinavia. So that's very different to other forms of Freemasonry and fringe Masonry that I can think of.
What I found interesting in reading this issue of the Fraternal Review, it's one of the few, and not to say that none of them have ever had this impact on me, but it's one of the few where I'm like, I'd kind of like to go see some of this if I ever got the chance to see it in person, but then I'm also very hesitant to do so because of the fact that it's not recognized by a lot of Grand Lodges. So then there's that other issue that we can run into as a Mason.
For sure, definitely we would. That's right.
How does one navigate through that to be able to learn about this or explore into it safely, so to speak?
Yeah, good question. Well, you can read the issue, of course. That would be probably the best start. And although I'm definitely plugging the issue of Fraternal Review, one thing I really wanted to do is to give a really great overview. So we have a history of the rite. We explore the esoteric teachings of the third degree. We actually give one of the rituals in Tyler form, which is a short form. We talk about some of the symbols that you would learn, and then we talk esoterically about one of the rituals as well. So it's almost like you're going through the rite on paper. But it's tricky to find out about. There are articles that you can find in Masonic journals. They tend to be rather critical because of maybe they're published in the Scottish Rite Journal, so there's a certain hostility towards it. But yeah, it's a little tricky to find out and get really good information on Memphis-Misraim, though the rites do exist out there. So
it's interesting too to kind of close up that part of the discussion. I think what makes it so appealing to some is the fact that it's like, ooh, don't go look into that. And other bodies and other Masons have tried to downplay it so much that now you're like, well, what's the mystery here? I want to see.
That's right. Yes. If, and you can read very critical articles and essays by regular Masons about Memphis-Misraim. And yes, it does make it more intriguing, because why are they so hot under the collar about this one particular rite? But I do think it is, the fact that they've gone through and they've got the 32nd degree or maybe 33rd, but someone else who's been in Memphis-Misraim is now 50th degree, and they've only been in it for 12 months or something. So.
Right. It would be if I ever met another brother who's like, well, I'm a 47th degree or 75th degree, I'd be like, what are you talking? I would be like, whoa.
Yeah.
But now I get it. And I think most Master Masons listening to this podcast episode, they know the story, the allegory of the Abrahamic legend. We kind of talked a little bit about that and the third degree. I wanted to get back to the article that Alexandros Armos
Yes.
You had mentioned he expands on the focus of the Misraim and Memphis degree,
Yeah.
and that was the one that I found really fascinating, is kind of walking through some of those deeper
That's
meanings.
right.
What part
Yes.
of this philosophy, when you were doing your research and
Mhm.
just your journey to seek more Masonic
Mm.
light, what
Mm.
was really speaking to you about this group?
Yes, well, in many respects, it is very similar to the Scottish Rite. I'm actually a lot more skeptical about higher degrees than people might imagine. I've studied occultism for 40 years at this point,
Mm.
and to me, it's completely fine that you would go through all these degrees, and there's a little bit about Kabbalah, and then there's something about ancient Egypt, and then something about runes. Personally, I think you can get all of this information from a book now, and it's often a little more superficial than you would think. The night I find personally, the Knight of Scandinavia degree, I find it fascinating that such a degree was created with Odin and runes. And historically, it's absolutely fascinating. But personally, I find it also, the actual ritual, quite trivial. It's basically lifted from the Poetic Edda and the Prose Edda, which are medieval Icelandic texts. But I do find it intriguing that all of this sort of esoteric, spiritual, mystical, religious ideas are poured into these rites, and that they become ever more expansive in a way. So I find that intriguing.
Two names that most Blue Lodge guys would recognize are Preston and Webb, because they made a big impact on our Blue Lodge ritual.
Mm-hmm.
In this issue of the Fraternal Review, we talked about, yes, you give a great outline of their third degree. You walk us through some of the other parts of the rite, but you also feature an interview with David Harrison.
Yeah, that's right.
Britain's well-known
Leading.
Masonic,
Yeah.
who brought up someone I was unfamiliar with,
Right.
John Yarker.
Yes.
Who was this brother? Who was this man, and what were his contributions?
Yeah, he's not that well known in regular Masonry, but he really should be, because he actually started out life in the world of Freemasonry as a regular Freemason, and a very active regular Freemason. And he was a member not only of the Blue Lodge, but also of Mark Masonry, Royal Arch, which is almost obligatory in England, and the Knights Templar orders as well. So, he was very active. I believe he was also behind the founding of a couple of regular Masonic rites as well. But then later on he broke away and became the head of Memphis-Misraim in Great Britain, and he called his rite the Ancient and Primitive Rite of Freemasonry. And he got that from, I believe, from Harry Seymour in the United States, in New York. And Harry Seymour had actually reduced the degrees back down to 33, so it was almost like an alternative to the Scottish Rite. And Yarker promoted and headed that rite in Great Britain. He's intriguing, not just because he was a regular Freemason for many years, a very active one, who became an irregular or fringe Mason, promoting the Rite of Memphis-Misraim, but he's also important because he crosses over with the world of Western occultism as well. So he actually chartered or gave a charter to Theodore Reuss in Germany, and Reuss was one of the founders of the Ordo Templi Orientis, which was later headed by Aleister Crowley, the notorious and publicity-seeking magus of the early 20th century. So,
I recognize that name, yes.
Yeah, that's right. And it's notorious, and a lot of things are said about Crowley that aren't true. But Crowley is easily the most influential occultist of the last 100 years, and I would think. I mean, I guess you could factor in other people such as Gerald Gardner, but I would think Crowley is more influential than anyone else if one is being objective. And so, so Yarker chartered Theodore Royce, who used these charters that he received to found the Ordo Templi Orientis, which was originally founded as a Masonic academia, and then later, now today, it's really regarded as an occult society, especially one that will teach you the secrets of magic, and in particular the secrets of sexual magic. So Yarker is this strange bridge between Freemasonry, fringe Masonry, and the occult world.
It's interesting because I've never really felt I'm trying to figure out how to actually put this into words, the statement. Every time I walk into a lodge, whether it's here in the nation's capital or, my home jurisdiction in upstate New York, you see this small collection of men. I think you know where I'm going to go with this one is, sometimes it's 6, 7, maybe 10, 12 guys, right? Mm-hmm. And we have this conversation all the time when you think about every man in your life, and the appeal of Freemasonry is so limited just to this group.
Yeah.
And you use terms like occult, which kind of gets me a little nervous. I'm like, I never really thought I was a part of the occult, to the hidden mysteries of Freemasonry, because I understand that and I subscribe to that thought. But now, to what this sounds like to me, and maybe part of the reason why it was so attacked, just an observation that I have, is that people look at this just as they go, oh, it's just like the Illuminati. We need to put this on another shelf and away from Freemasonry, when really it was just brothers in a certain time, or men in a certain time, that were all trying to seek or find certain answers, that were going down this path, and it just kept getting smaller and smaller and smaller with the number of them that this appealed to.
Yeah, that's right. Well, you do find movers and shakers of the occult in the various rites of Memphis and Misraim, especially under Yarker. But yes, I mean, although, it might be said that it expanded to an almost ridiculous degree, 96, 97 degrees.
Right.
Yes, there is clearly a pursuit of mystical or esoteric knowledge, and an attempt to bring it together in one place. Now, whether that's successful or not, it doesn't really matter. But yes, there is a definite seeking after eternal truth, one might say.
And that's what we're all looking for. And I think that's a great way to close out the issue that you did, was with the article on Rudolf Steiner.
Yes, Rudolf Steiner. That's right.
He headed his own branch of the Memphis-Misraim rite in the early 1900s.
Yes, and essentially.
What I found really interesting was he used the term snoozing forces.
That's right.
With the 4 different kinds of instructions or disciplines. And as a Blue Lodge Mason, this is what kind of appealed to me. Like, what was the reawakening that he talked about? What did he believe was necessary for initiates to experience to go through this?
Yes, that's a good question. So just to give a little background on Rudolf Steiner, he's mostly known today for founding the school of anthroposophy, the wisdom of man, essentially. He was the head of the German branch in Berlin of the Theosophical Society as well. And the Theosophical Society, or Theosophy, today is a quaint, marginal, fringe, spiritual society or school of thought. But at that time and before that, it was absolutely enormous, and shaped the thinking of a great many people, and it was extremely influential as well, politically, especially in the East, in the sort of anti-colonial movement, and with the promotion of Buddhism and the protection of Buddhism in Sri Lanka as well. But Steiner joined the Theosophical Society around 1902 after lecturing to its London branch in England, and became the head in Berlin. And a little while after that, yes, he was chartered in 1905, actually, to run a lodge of Memphis-Misraim. And he used that charter to found his own, essentially his own Memphis-Misraim rite, although he stripped it down, I think, to 7 degrees, and really infused it with his own mythology. Steiner was, on the one hand, you could say he was a bit of a crank, but on the other, you could say he was also a visionary. You know, he was an artist. He was something of an architect. He wrote many, many books. He founded the Waldorf School of Education, which is all over the world today. And he was also the founder, or one of the founders, of biodynamic farming as well. So he's left quite an imprint on the world, although he's virtually unknown. But in his rite, and his followers might say that he stripped out all of the Freemasonry, but if you actually look at it, it's very largely Masonic. So you find the square and compasses in there. You find, you know, it's essentially a Masonic ritual. They have their own Hiramic legend, but because Steiner would receive these visions about, you know, the astral world and what really went on with God, it's a very different Hiramic legend. So in there, the Queen of Sheba, for example, goes to visit King Solomon with the intention of marrying him, and then she meets the builder Hiram and is completely smitten by him, realizing that he must have been, you know, given this sublime knowledge of creation by the, you know, divine beings, and falls for him. And then Solomon becomes very jealous and essentially gets rid of him with three ruffians. So you know, it's a different story, and it's much more it's much stranger and much more esoteric, but it is a fusion of Freemasonry and his own vision, and Memphis-Misraim, and has all kinds of elements in it, alchemy, the planets. It's much more occult looking, and there are different elements on the altar. So, you know, it's quite curious.
One of the things I love about this issue and the work that you do at the Fraternal Review is it kind of ties into our positioning statement here at Craftsmen Online, where we say we're modern men exploring the ancient mysteries, right?
Yeah.
And whether you're a Blue Lodge Mason or you're in some of these other bodies and doing this, we're all kind of the same thing. We're trying to find the answers to these time-old questions, or quote unquote mysteries, that are out there. And what's interesting in reading an article like this about the Rite of Memphis-Misraim is that these were different men at different points, some separated by hundreds of years, right?
Yeah.
That were going through this. And we benefit now being able to read this in a single issue of the Fraternal Review. And it's pretty exciting. Like when you talk about the differences between the allegories, like, wow, that is a different way of looking at it. That's pretty interesting. But to those that are more learned on this, it's like the old NBC. Well, if you haven't seen it, it's new to you. Like there's already guys that are really into this. So my question is, we're living in this era now where, as we look at where we are in, you know, the landscape of time, we're in this technology-driven AI, artificial intelligence society, right? And when these men were, you pick the 1700s, the 1800s, the, you know, whenever they were searching for this, they were also going through massive eras of transformation and growth.
They were. That's right.
How do you see this being relevant, or how do you see this being intriguing to men today?
Well, let's say today and tomorrow. So
there you go.
Yes. Well, obviously, the internet means that people do more and more things online. They're less and less capable of personal interactions. And AI is only going to exacerbate that, right? And people will think in the future that AI has all of the real answers, and you can, if you type in, you know, something, how should I be governed or something, it's going to spit out an answer, and people will think that that is correct, which is going to be extremely dangerous. But a lot of people will completely lose their humanity if they haven't already. But I think for a certain number of people, they will still want personal interaction, and they will still want mystery, and they will still want to contemplate the deeper questions of life. And, let me put it to you like this. I always think and say that, you can have 100 ideas a day, and maybe we all have 100 ideas a day, but you also only have one idea every decade. And what I mean by that is, you have fleeting, trivial ideas. I could do this, I could do that. Oh, that's a good idea. I hadn't thought of that before. But there is something overarching that we contemplate, and that's why we change over a period, and things don't appeal to us anymore, or we become interested in something else. And AI and the internet and the modern world gives us those little 100 answers, but it doesn't give us the one big question that we need to contemplate to make our life meaningful. And the word quest and the word question come from the same source, by the way. And we need to pursue the question, the mystery. And the people you meet that are miserable have an answer for everything, but people who are content and happy and have a purpose in life, they have a question.
Man, that is, love it. That is so, I joke with people all the time, like, you should put that on a t-shirt, but that is, people that are happy have a quest, they have a question. I like that. And I'm just thinking of everybody that I run into, the negative people, the people that have these unfortunate challenges in their life. And they tend to have a lot of excuses or reasons for that point, but they're not trying to seek getting out of the hole. They just,
that's right. And I'm sure if you ask them anything, they always have an answer for everything. So whatever it is.
I was not expecting you to say that, and you've really put me on my back foot. I love it. You gave me some definite food for thought. That's why I love talking to you, and I love doing this podcast.
Well, thank you. It's good talking with you always.
Well, I just want to let our listener know, and also to our viewers on YouTube Live, this isn't going to be the last time we talk to you. You have a couple more books that you're in the process of finishing up, and some really interesting work in a tarot deck that we might even be able to talk about before the end of this year.
Yes, well, I think so. It's probably going to be out in a few months, but it's interesting. All tarot decks are quite similar, but I'm definitely exploring it in something of a new way. So we'll see.
Awesome. Any teases that you can give us, or any news you can give us on potential topics or themes, or any writing work that you're doing for the Fraternal Review and upcoming editions?
Well, the issue after this, which will be a month later, is Jamie Lamb on astrology and Freemasonry. And that, again, takes quite a different view than you may have seen before. And that is certainly something that we try to do with the Fraternal Review, always present things that people haven't come across before.
I love it. Love it. All right. Easily the best way for me, we're recording this on a Saturday morning, but I'm sure when we go back to listen to it, it'll be a Monday, but any day, it's always a good way to start with you, Brother Angel. Thank you so much for your time.
Thank you. I appreciate it.